Hello everyone, and welcome back to Social Work 300. Mr. Maynard or Jordan here, and I just wanted to provide you with a brief PowerPoint lecture to supplement the readings and videos you'll be watching this week. Now, in Module 1, if you'll recall, we spent a good deal of time defining and understanding some of the broad concepts of diversity and difference. Specifically, we looked at three core concepts: diversity, intersectionality, and social justice. Now, in this week's module, Module 2, we're going to dive into a topic that requires a bit more self-reflection and personal introspection. And that topic is implicit bias. And before we begin, I want to acknowledge that due to the self-reflection and introspection required with this topic, implicit bias can be a very difficult and challenging conversation to have with oneself. However, it is an incredibly important conversation to have. So with that in mind, if you would like to discuss any of the information we cover in this week's module, or you're having a difficult time with it, please feel free to reach out. My virtual door is always open. Shoot me an email. We can set up a chat. That'll be fine. Now, we have three learning outcomes for this module in its entirety. By the end of this module, we want you to be able to understand what implicit bias is. We want to begin the process of exploring our own biases. And finally, we want to be able to connect implicit bias to some of the explicit discrimination we see happening in our society today. So what exactly is implicit bias? The American Psychological Association, or APA, defines implicit biases as unconscious stereotypes or attitudes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions. Think of it as a mental shortcut that our brains take without even realizing it. And a really important thing to remember here is that everyone, regardless of religion, sex, gender, race, ethnicity, everyone has implicit biases. Having implicit bias does not make you a bad person. In fact, implicit bias are a natural part of how our brains process information and form connections. The goal isn't to get rid of implicit biases completely, but to become aware of them so we can see how they influence us and our actions. To get a better understanding of implicit bias, let's take a moment and look at three of its key characteristics. First, implicit bias is, well, as the name implies, implicit. This means it's an unconscious action. It's unintentional. So this is different from when we see someone engaging in overt racism or sexism, because in those, a person is consciously aware of their prejudice. They're consciously aware of what they're doing. Implicit bias is different. It's implicit. It's unconscious. It operates below the surface of our conscious mind. It happens without us even meaning to. Second key characteristic of implicit bias is implicit biases are automatic. You see, our brains are designed to create quick association to help us navigate the world. For example, when you hear the words peanut butter, your brain automatically associates it with jelly. You don't even have to consciously think about it. If you're from Appalachia or this area, if you hear the word beans, your brain automatically probably associates it with cornbread. Again, it's not something you have to do. It's just something that the culture you're raised in, the media you consume, and the information you've gathered about life has led your brain to make this connection. Our brains do the same thing with people and concepts. We form quick judgments based on experiences, media, and our surrounding. So, implicit biases are implicit, they're automatic, and finally, this is very important, our implicit biases may conflict with our conscious beliefs. You can be a person who genuinely believes in equality and fairness for all, but still hold implicit biases that influence your actions in subtle ways. This is why the topic can be so uncomfortable for us. It forces us to look at the gap between what we believe and how we sometimes behave. So, since implicit biases are implicit, meaning they're unconscious, we don't mean to do them, and since they're automatic and they happen automatically, why is it important for us to recognize them? Well, you see, it's crucial for us to understand how unconscious biases can lead to real, explicit consequences. It's important put another way, it's important for us to understand how unconscious biases can lead to actual conscious decisions. How unintentional bias can lead to intentional actions. It's a chain reaction. An unconscious thought or an action can influence a biased action. For example, if a hiring manager has an implicit bias that associates certain names with a lack of professionalism, they might unintentionally dismiss a resume with that name. And over time, these small actions can build up to create large-scale inequalities and lead to explicit discrimination in our society, impacting things like hiring, housing, and access to resources. You see, this is where we connect back to our Module 1 conversations about diversity and social justice. Unchecked implicit biases can create and reinforce the systemic injustices that prevent true equity. So now that we know what biases are, and we know how they can lead to biased decisions, which can lead to some of the systemic discrimination we see in our society, we have to ask ourselves, how do we begin to uncover and look at our own implicit biases? As we said, implicit biases are unconscious. They happen without us meaning to. So how can we even explore our own biases? Well, one of the most well-known tools is the Implicit Association Test, or IAT. And it's a simple test. It doesn't take a very long time to do, but it's a simple test that measures how quickly you pair certain concepts. For example, it might ask you to quickly sort images of faces and words into different categories. The test measures the speed of your responses. If you're faster at pairing a certain group with a positive word, it can indicate a stronger, more automatic connection in your mind. So this week, you're going to be taking 3 different IATs as part of this module. Again, just as a reminder, and again, these tests, we're doing these tests so you can begin to explore your own bias. But again, as you take these tests, remember, this is not about getting a good or a bad score. Several of you may take the test and not like your results. Again, if you take this test and it shows you have a bias, this does not mean you're a bad person. This does not mean that you hold some deep racial views. It just means that you may have some bias. And again, this test, like I said, isn't about getting a good or bad score. It's about beginning your own personal exploration and getting insight, just a little bit of beginner insight into your own automatic associations. I can say from experience, the first time that I took the IAT, I was not pleased with my own scores. However, this is what led me to begin looking at my own biases in a different ways. As a final reminder, the goal of this module is not to make anyone in this class feel any shame for any bias that you may hold. This goal of this module is not to make anyone feel like a bad person. The goal of this module is to give us a starting point, learning about implicit biases, and a starting point for awareness. Its goal is to show that self-awareness is the first, most powerful step we can take towards creating a more just and equitable society. As you reflect on today's presentation, and as you take some time to go through the module readings and the module videos, and as you take the IAT test this week, please know that my virtual door is always open. If anything comes up for you, or if you simply have questions about what we've discussed, or you want to talk about the results you received on the IAT, don't hesitate to reach out. We can continue this conversation one-on-one, and we can, work to increase our dialogue. Again, this is Mr. Maynard, and this is just a very brief presentation on implicit bias. Let me know if you need any help or you have any questions, and have a great week.